and ECHO team. They all joined. Would any of you like to speak just to make sure that your your mic is working?
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Excellent. That worked. Okay. All right.
I switched audio.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. We are going to dive right into our teamwork today, and both project teams are with us. The inventory project team will be joining a little bit before 11, so you do not see them on the participant list yet. If you could advance to the next slide, Jen. So these are the group agreements that we flash at the beginning of the meeting. It's a good reminder. And also just this meeting and probably the next few meetings are really in the spirit of gathering feedback, doing good work together. The project teams are sponges at this moment, really looking forward to your feedback. They don't have all the answers. So there are some blanks sometimes in what they'll show you. And so this is really just an opportunity to work together. So please do look at it like a work session. Next slide. Go for it, Jen.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome those who are new. As always, if you want to unmute yourself as a panelist, you just click on the microphone icon, and as well as your video, you could always have it on if you're comfortable, or you could have it off as well. If you have any issues with WebEx, feel free to send me a private message in the chat. You also have the option to chat with everyone. That means that the public can also see your comments. Thank you.
Alrighty, awesome. So next slide. There are a couple of people that have low bandwidth today or joining by phone, and that is okay. So understand your video might be off. And also a couple people are on vacation. So I don't believe Andrea Kreiner from the Association of Soil, what is that? Oregon Conservation Districts will be here today. And Megan Kempler from the Climate and Ag Network is Climate and Agriculture Network is also not with us today as I stumble across everyone's organizations. Hello. Yes. Someone speaking would like to speak? If not, put on your mute. Okay. So first up is Estelano Advisors and ECHO Northwest. And as promised, diving in, Cynthia, would you take it away for your team?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, committee members, esteemed committee members. It's been a few weeks since we've seen you all. I hope your summers have been going well. I think we're going to take just a moment to load up our presentation. So bear with us for just one moment. We're happy to meet with you all this morning to provide an update on our work with our work to date on the Natural Climate Solutions Workforce Study. So let's go on to the next slide. So here's our agenda for today. So our team members at ECHO Northwest have been incredibly busy to date, identifying the occupations that are considered to be part of the natural climate solution sector. And we have a list and something for you all to look at today. And in accordance with our scope with Odo, ECHO is also developing something that we're calling occupational profiles, which are essentially one-page fact sheets that describe each occupation, associated skills. So we'll have a draft profile for your feedback today. Concurrently, the Estelano Advisors team, in collaboration with Odo and ECHO, we've been doing a lot of thinking about how to approach the focus of the study. As you all well know, the sector is quite broad, and the occupations within the sectors are many and can span, multiple sectors. So in the interest of giving our final report a clearer focus, we want to share a frame and approach for the study that's grounded in the direction that's been set for in the legislation, and also speaks to some of the needs that we heard from you all in meeting one. or at least meeting one the first time that we all met with you all, about addressing the need for improving the quality of jobs and really thinking about career pathways. We've also built in some time for questions or collaboration, as we're calling it, on the screen. So we want to make sure to pause in order to hear from you all. So I will just ask that I'm going to hand it over soon to Echo Northwest, and they're going to go through their presentation. I'm going to ask that you all just jot down your questions, and then we could save the discussion and conversation for the collaboration pieces of the presentation. Okay, so next slide, please. So these are the objectives for today. We want to share our frame and approach for the workforce needs study. We want to collect feedback on the Natural Climate Solutions occupation list and profiles, and then also talk a little bit about job quality and transparent career pathways, where we're going to keep talking about this concept of quality jobs and developing career pathways. And we want to be able to share our frame with you all to just to establish some common understanding about what exactly we mean and how that resonates with you all as folks that are much deeper in the sector than we are. So that is what we hope to get out of today's meeting. Next slide, please. So before I hand it over to Andrew, I wanted to introduce this idea of natural climate solutions project phases. So when thinking about this sector or multiplicity of sectors, for me and maybe for you all, we find that it's actually the most helpful to think about this in the context of a project. So let's say we're talking about a coastal restoration project. You know, what are the types of occupations that are associated with that project? Generally, and I do mean generally, because this might look different based on the type of project at hand, we can anticipate some occupations that would lead or support the planning of the climate solution. You know, things from land acquisition to design to permitting, et cetera. Concurrently or thereafter, we can assume that there's going to be some occupations that are dedicated to the implementation of the solution, be it through construction, the conservation efforts, et cetera, et cetera. Lastly, once the solution is in place, we should ideally anticipate occupations dedicated to the maintenance of and ongoing operations of the solution. That's the stewardship jobs to make sure that the solution meets the objectives for which it was designed. Some occupations may only do work in one of these project phases. Some of them may span multiple phases. Project managers, for example, I could see a project manager doing work along all three of these sectors. So I wanted to introduce these categories now because they're going to inform how we talk about these occupations throughout this presentation and how we're going to approach the project moving forward. So there will be time for questions and reactions to this frame, but I wanted to establish it now because we're going to keep talking about things in roughly this way. So I'll stop there. With that frame in mind, I'll hand it over to Andrew. And I think we might do a little screen switcheroo here. So please bear with us while we do that.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. I will attempt to share my screen here and we'll see if this works. Bear with me here for a second. Okay, are people able to see the slides?
Looks good.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Cynthia, for providing that frame. We will revisit that in our few slides here. I just want to say a couple things generally about what we've been up to. As Cynthia mentioned, we've been very busy trying to characterize and define the natural climate solutions workforce and sector in a way that will allow us to say useful things about it. Our work will consist of a couple of different pieces. One is the workforce assessment, where we'll be trying to look at suitably defined natural climate solutions sector as a whole. But the primary goal here really is to help everybody, decision makers, the public, et cetera, understand really the diversity of roles, occupations, skills, and workers within the sector. For our process, we usually start with what are imperfect, but at least standardized industry and occupational classifications. For good reason, those classifications have a lot of inertia. They don't respond immediately to changes in the field, but that means that there are a lot of holes in what we're doing. So what I'm going to show you in the next few slides is drawn largely from those standard occupational definitions, occupational titles, and we're really looking for as much input as people are willing to give from you as a group, from others, through the engagement that Estelano is going to be pursuing over the next, and has been pursuing throughout this project, to really round out what we're saying about the industry, to make sure that it resonates with the field as much as possible. But so there's sort of a comprehensive workforce assessment, and then we will be preparing a fair number of occupational profiles that highlight selected occupations to really help decision makers, workforce development entities, and so on, really understand what's necessary to support, what kinds of workers, what kinds of skills are necessary to support the sector, with a focus on occupations in that the implement and maintain phases of projects that Cynthia just mentioned. So what I'm going to show you next is, it's a little bit dry, but it's a long list of occupations. The titles are, with one exception, sort of standardized occupational titles, but just want to show you what we've been looking at. We have made an attempt to classify each occupation according to the project phase or phases that they fit into. There are a lot of holes. Happy to take a little bit of discussion as we're moving through this, but hope to reserve some time at the end, and we can revisit both the occupational list and the occupational profile. We have a draft that I'll show you, again, to start getting that input. I think there's far more to talk about here than we have of time available. So very interested in any feedback you have after the fact, offline. I see Jason has posted a Google Doc for comments and so on, and really looking forward to all of that input. So without further ado, these are sorted in a draft classification. We'll show you first occupations that we have identified as instrumental to that planning phase of NCS projects. We'll move into those that are in the implement, and then finally the maintain. As you can see already, there are probably more X's belong these boxes, but there are some cross-cutting occupations. For example, farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural managers in the middle there. We have identified as important in each phase of of selected natural climate solutions. And so I'm sure we've gotten some of this wrong. This is a draft. It's a relatively new framework. So interested in feedback, but just want to put this in front of you. You can see that for the most part, these are occupations in a large number of scientists, engineers, and so on. Want to point out ecologists for 1 second. This is one example of an occupation that does not show up explicitly in the standardized classification. In the Bureau of Labor Statistics occupational codes, ecologists would typically fall under conservation scientists or foresters. But we had some input that ecologists are so important to so many natural climate solutions that it's worth making an effort to call them out separately, which will require cobbling together some data from a number of different sources. And there are other examples of occupations and roles in the NCS world that we may want to take a similar approach for. So I'll pause there for a second to see if there are any big picture questions, or I'd say high level, something, this is not the full list of occupations, but high level, this is very wrong, or something large is missing.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
As far as, this is not a big picture thing, but as far as foresters, you need to include them. They need an X in maintain as well.
Okay.
Over a long life cycle of a crop of trees, they do a lot to maintain it.
Okay, yep, thank you.
If you would like, Andrew, I'm wondering if we could, Jason just made the Google Doc related to this list, which folks can access at the same time they're raising their hands and talking to you, so they can actually put comments on the document. Would that be helpful?
That would be very helpful, yep.
Okay, so Jason, could you please share that Google link, and then also make sure it's editable when you share it, not just viewable. Okay, please continue.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And again, time for discussion. We can flip back to this for any other input as time allows. But again, just want to sort of give you a flavor of where we are right now.
Andrew, can I ask a quick question?
Yep, absolutely.
It is similar to the previous comment. Can you explain just what I guess the maintain column means, and what your thinking was, and just having it related to farmers, ranchers, forest fire inspectors, because I could see in a lot of these other columns that long-term engagement would be important. So I'm just kind of interested in hearing your explanation of what is meant by this maintain column and why it was limited to those two.
Yeah, so not as an excuse, but I will say again, this is a relatively new framework. We just started discussing this with Estelano this week, so I will defer to Cynthia to correct where I go off the rails here. But the way we've been thinking about it, which may not be completely correct, but is that the maintain category is really, it's probably a bad analogy, but in the weeds, if you will, doing the work of maintaining, as opposed to you know, your ecologist is probably overseeing things at all points, but it's more of a planning role and directing role instead of on the ground, cutting down trees, clearing invasive species, spreading, you know, pesticides, these kinds of things.
Yeah, and this is very much a frame that we're testing, but we would see the occupations in the maintain category as the jobs, the folks that are making sure that the natural climate solution is meeting the needs for which it was designed over time.
So for instance, I will give an example. When we were talking about this as a group, I, you know, have history in wetland restoration, stream restoration, and so you often plan design. You do the thing. You're whatever the thing is you're planning to do. You need to do planning documents, consult with people, draw technical drawings, think about what you're doing. Then you're going to implement the thing, which some of those people come along to do that. But then also there's very specific jobs that do the thing. For instance, heavy equipment operators in that stream restoration world are like very in the construction mobilization of implementing a project like that. There are probably specialized equipment for forestry. Don't know because not a forester. And then, but when you maintain, like that, you're coming back to that project and or you're maintaining the natural climate solution that you put in place. That could be weed spraying, that could be monitoring, that could be, you know, growth rates that someone needs to go out there and monitor, like trying to kind of think through the jobs that way. And in addition to like thinking through a carbon lens, that maintain category becomes even a little bit more important because like if you're implementing a natural climate solution to store and sequester and store carbon, you're going to need to make sure that's maintained through time. Like you don't want it to go backwards. And so there's just kind of maybe that focus on maintain that there wasn't before. Hopefully that's helpful to the group.
Yeah, thank you. And so any other big picture questions? In the interest of time, I want to show you the rest of, whoops, sorry,
Yeah.
the rest of the occupations.
I have a big picture
I've got a quick
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Okay, I think go ahead and ask Ellen, and I can pop in after you.
Okay. So these are all very specialist kind of occupations. I don't see the general occupations of like putting projects together. Program managers, project managers, because someone needs to find the funding and do all that other stuff and bring the specialists together. I just don't see that in your list.
Okay. Good feedback. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good feedback. And I think this is true. I don't think there is a sort of a specific occupation project manager, but that they would fall under a number of other occupations. I think in terms of if we're profiling some of those, I think it would be a matter of probably certain types of managers. I could see, you know, farmer, rancher, and other agricultural managers as managing projects, and that role could be called out. If that makes sense.
Andrew, could you speak to the fact that the titles come from, you're kind of working within the frame of a database, kind of like start there, because I certainly needed to learn about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So except for ecologist, which I mentioned does not show up, all of the titles are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics standard occupational classification titles. Those, they have, again, they're standardized, which is very helpful, but there's a lot of inertia and a lot of imperfection, and they do not, in many cases, reflect what's happening in the field. And as I'm sure everybody's aware, in every job, there are multiple roles that may fit under, you know, you could claim that some of the tasks look more like one occupation than another. And so part of what we're doing here, this is really a first pass at these occupations. You'll see in the occupational profile how we're hoping to address some of those imperfections. The listing of these things is never going to be perfect, but we do want to, you know, develop this list further so that what we present finally does resonate with people in the field that know the work better than we do.
Andrew, this is Dean Mober. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Kind of to echo Ellen's comment, there's also administrative people, you know, secretarial folks and so forth that are
Right.
important in the process.
Yep.
But the other comment I'd make is I'm a director of a conservation district, and we've got a staff of 25, which is a big conservation district. But I used to work for USDA, and we had a couple hundred people in the state. And if you asked people in my office or in USDA which category they fit in, you know, the people who go out and work with farmers or foresters, they could fit in multiple categories, you know, conservation scientist, crop advisor, ecologist, forester. So I think that's going to be a challenge that you're lumping people into the same categories, you know, so like one person who does the same thing in my conservation district as, say, in Union County's conservation district, that you don't classify them differently. It seems like that might be important. I don't know, but that's going to be a challenge in this, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I absolutely appreciate that input. And it's, I mean, this is true pretty much across the board, in that we're never going to be able to, and I know you're not saying characterize every employee, but we're never going to be able to capture the full sort of range of different combinations of skills. And our goal here, this is not going to be an exhaustive list of occupations. Our overall workforce assessment will include, to the extent we can identify them, you know, all types of occupations. They may not be called out explicitly, but we do want to count people accurately. But again, do appreciate the input. And I think our goal is to, you know, we're starting with this relatively standard list and then taking input to make sure that what we end up with talking about in our assessment and the profiles describes in enough detail certain occupations that are important to the sector and maybe deserve special attention from a workforce development perspective, that we can, you know, communicate outwards those needs of the sector. That makes sense.
Jasmine?
Hey, Andrew, thanks. This is another kind of context setting question. I'm curious. So it sounds like this is a starting point that you're basing out of the database. I'm curious then, you know, if this will be featured in the occupation profiles, these occupations right here, and also if you have kind of criteria or parameters, like how broad or how narrow should we go when providing feedback? Like, do we take into account like permitting officials or, you know, experts and specialists, or do we go, I'm just curious about like kind of the parameters, how broad, how narrow?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, in terms of this list, which will change, will evolve, we would see the profiles to be drawn from this, but we're not going to be profiling every occupation. I think we have 40 or 50 occupations listed here. Focus of those profiles will be on the implement and maintain occupations, so probably not anthropologists, for example. And so we need enough feedback to make sure that if there's something that anyone here or others think has to have a profile because it's so critical or so much in short supply, we want to hear about that. But happy to take more feedback. We are not, again, looking for an exhaustive list of everything every type of employee that is working in the sector. Focus really is on the one, and I don't want to say some people are more important than others, but occupations that deserve attention from this kind of a workforce assessment.
Gotcha. And just one follow-up, are you looking to profile like certain amount of people within each category within the plan, implement, or maintain category, just to make sure that you're getting representation across the board? Or is that just kind of like, because right now I see a lot of folks on the planning category and less on the maintain. So
yeah, well, you'll see more of those. I have a couple more slides that
okay,
go
sorry.
on.
I'll stop there.
Yep. But certainly looking for a you know, diversity of types of occupations, because the goal, as we understand it, really is to prevent not profiles of everything that's going on, every type of role, but really highlight the diversity of the types of occupations, as well as occupations that for one reason or other deserve special attention from, you know, workforce assessment.
Okay, thank you, Nikita. And then Andrew, I think it's kind of important, Cynthia recommended that you get through your slides and then we kind of have group discussion, and I might recommend that we do that so everyone has a full picture of what they're thinking through, and then discussion can commence. I appreciate everyone's thoughts so far. Nikita.
Yeah, real quickly, I was just wondering if colleges or universities specializing in agricultural and natural sciences are a part of this occupation title.
We do not have professors, instructors, et cetera, on here. I think that's useful feedback. We could consider including them as a vital part of the pipeline in terms of training people as well as research and development.
Cool, thank you.
Great, thank you all, great feedback. So longer list here. Again, let's get through at least a couple of slides here. We can come back to this as needed. This is focused largely on, we've moved through the occupations we've currently identified as in the planning phase of projects. This is the implementation phase. You can see we've put a lot of these occupations in both the implement and maintain, lots of technician types, equipment operators in some cases, and so on. I'll just pause here for 10 seconds, let you absorb it. I think a list of these has been distributed. I'm not sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but again, we can come
yes,
back
you can continue. The Google Doc is open for viewing in the chat.
Okay, so then finally, just smaller handful of occupations that we have currently classified as exclusively in the maintain category. Again, I will just pause for a few seconds, let you absorb some words, and then want to show you the draft profile we have, and I'll say a few things about that, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Oh, sorry, and I won't pause here, but a list of occupations that we thought about or have been suggested and we're still thinking about, and a number that popped up in our standard classification of industry and occupations that we think probably do not belong, but we're again open to input on these as well. Okay, so final piece here, we have a draft occupational profile. I'll show you pieces in more detail, so don't feel like you need to magnify too much or squint here. This is a draft we have for the forest and conservation technician. We're open to input on the types of information we're presenting, as well as things that might be missing, and so on. Again, the purpose here is to inform the external world about the diversity of occupations, roles, and the characteristics of workers in the NCS sector. As I've already mentioned, and similar to the prior list, most of the data on the draft profile and most of the data on the profiles we're going to present will be drawn from standard administrative databases, particularly the ONET occupational information suite of websites and tools provided by the US Department of Labor. We also have some employment department from the Oregon Employment Department, and so on. But as we've already discussed, key limitation is that these are standardized systems that do not necessarily reflect what's going on in the field in all cases, do not necessarily reflect what's going on in Oregon. We have national occupational data in some cases, but not local. So again, really open to feedback in terms of the type of information, how we should think about prioritizing certain pieces of information, and so on. So at the top of the profile, we have a couple of things. One, description of the occupation. We've made an attempt here for forest and conservation technicians. Obviously, work to be done, but just to give a sense of the kinds of things that the occupation is involved in. This is one place where we could start to recognize the fact that the occupation title is a broad title, and maybe encompasses distinct types of workers, forest technicians and conservation technicians as different things, for example. Also getting at some of those points is the light blue box. We've made an attempt to identify other titles that are closely related to the occupation that might be more likely to be used in the field or in job postings, et cetera. Some of the types of natural climate solutions that these workers work in, and then some very basic employment information, current employment and currently projected employment for the future. Second piece of information, more detail about the occupation itself. This drawn very much from the standardized data. We have some wage information from the employment department. We plan to show the typical wage range for the occupation as well as for the Oregon workforce overall. This is an area where we know there are a lot of weaknesses. There's a lot of regional variation in wages. We have some of that from the employment department, but even that does not necessarily get at the important wage information that employers and prospective job candidates are looking at. And so part of, we understand the engagement and other data collection, we're hoping to provide better wage information, but that's difficult information to collect. So we will start with the employment department information and develop as possible. We've made an attempt. I think this is where we're most looking for input on, not for this specific occupation, but in how to approach this. We want to describe sort of the specialized skills and knowledge that are important occupations, not describe everything they might need to know or all of the qualifications, but what is it about employment in the NCS sector for this occupation? What do they need to know? What do employers need? What do self-employed individuals working in these fields need to know to successfully navigate the sector? Then final piece here, some demographic information drawn from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, which is a sample. It's not perfect. In many cases, we can't say things with great precision, but do try to provide a demographic profile with sex, age, educational attainment, and race and ethnicity. So that was a lot very quickly. Open to questions on the profile, but did just want to leave with 3 prompts here. I'm not sure how much time we have for discussion left. But one, again, thinking about the goals of this particular project, what occupations, positions, and roles do you see as most in need of attention based on your experience with natural climate solutions? Could be augmenting our profile list, could be specific skills, etc. Similarly, where are the pinch points as you see them? What skills and training are most lacking in either incumbent or future NCS workers? Maybe getting at the question of post-secondary education, other kinds of training programs. And then finally, when you've had time to absorb the profile draft, and we can discuss it now certainly, are there other types of information that would be very helpful in a summary designed to illustrate the needs of the natural climate solution workforce? And I will stop there and open up to questions, comments, and feedback.
Awesome. Okay. Hands raising. We, I think we have about 10 minutes. Kathy asked where the projected employment numbers are from, and Melissa answered in the chat.
Are you calling on us, Liz, or are we just?
Oh, I am calling on you, Betsy.
Sorry.
That is okay. Thank you.
Let me just pitch right in here. I still think, and I've argued this to Kathy before, but let me make one more pitch. I still think that we need to consider including mill workers, sawmill workers in this workforce analysis. If we're talking about keeping working forests as working forests, those logs have to have somewhere to go. And sawmills are closing all over the state. If we don't have sawmill workers, which is kind of a concerning problem, to be honest, right now, then the logs are not going to have anywhere to go, and it's too expensive to ship them very far. So, the further sawmills are apart, the more costly it is to ship logs, and the less worth it becomes, because that's it's a raw commodity. There's no added value that those logs can use to pay for their shipping, for example. And I know you can make the argument that, well, if we're going to include sawmill workers, then we should probably be including food processing workers too, because if we're including crops, then, the food processors are who organize those into food that people can eat. But the thing is that sawmill workers are processing a commodity that continues to sequester carbon for a very long time. And I don't think you can say the same about a lot of other sort of processing and manufacturing workers of a raw commodity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's my
Thank
best
you.
pitch.
Yep. And I will say, without taking an opinion on or a stance on whether we should or should not include that, I think that's valid input. We obviously cannot say, well, it's the whole economy. We have to draw the lines, and so we can take that back for continued discussion. And again, our goal, I think, Solano's goal and Odo's goal is to come up with a definition that is, as coherent as possible and speaks to the problems that the problems and opportunities that the sector faces.
I would just urge you to consider the fact that logs and lumber sequester carbon for a long, long time.
Yep.
Thank you, Betsy. Jason? Oh, Jason, are you speaking? Where did Jason go? I can't see him. We cannot hear you if you're speaking. No? Yes, I just heard you.
My computer is deciding to not know how WebEx works today. Sorry. So the first thing I was going to say was just to support what Betsy said, that no one buys a log to have a log, and without some sort of advanced manufacturing or unadvanced manufacturing, the forest quickly becomes a sink, not or a source of carbon, not a sink for it. And so that is critical. But my question I was going to have around ologists. You have ecologists. I see a few other ologists, but for a forest management company like Green Diamond where I work, ologists are big. We have biologists, we have hydrologists, we have geologists. Is that in your mind all encompassed by ecologists, or are we thinking that's a different, is ecologist an umbrella term that pulls all that in, or is ecologist a specific job title separate from the other sort of ologists out there?
Yeah, well, I'd say, I think, at least according to standard data, I mean, people we would call ecologists do fall under other categories for the most part. There is no standard ecologist. I think probably as you're getting at, the role of ecologist is important enough that, again, this was input we've received, that we should do what we can to call it out separately. And it's a lot of different types of work as well. So we need to figure out how to accommodate all of that. So that's one example of where we might treat an occupation as separately from the standard classification. And it's our job to figure out how to communicate that.
So,
I will offer, Jason, that when we were looking over the long list of what's in the database, that there's a lot of ologists in there, and ecologist is not in there, as Andrew alluded to. And so that is just one gap we're experiencing, and we're working with the team on how to deal with that. So the other ologists are captured, and they do play important roles. So,
and we do have some, like hydrologists, for example, is in there. We have a couple others.
Great.
If there are other ologists that you think we should include, please use that Google Doc to, if you see them missing, please add the other ologists.
Okay, will do.
And I do want to emphasize it, and you will tell me, well, it's super important, but that our goal is not to list every occupation or every role that exists in the industry, but really to, in the profiles, highlight certain parts of NCS projects and the occupations that are most important there. And then in the workforce assessment, we will be calling out different things like ologists, for example, but we'll probably not be mentioning everything by name, and need to get to a point where what we present reflects what your interests and the interests of the field.
I think that makes sense. To me, ecologist is maybe an umbrella term, and maybe someone goes to college thinking, I want to go be an ecologist, and somewhere along the way they specialize in something else that falls under that umbrella. Just seeking that clarification. Appreciate it.
That's helpful.
Okay, I'm gonna check the hands. You guys have the Google Doc to edit, and really appreciate all this information. I know that when they first shared it with me, I asked all the same questions you're asking. So what are the limitations of the database? How come there's no ecologist? Like these people do all the things, and working to try and put sideboards so that the team can communicate clearly in the report, while also reporting on limitations of the data. So what would be nice to report on, but that we can't yet, is going to be a big part of this report. Kathy, I wanted to respond to your question or your comment yes, to how we can expand. And there's also foundational information like defining what NCS occupations are in order to get there. And so step one, step two, kind of taking the first step before the second step, and we can talk about that more.
I was just thinking about that description, and in the description there's a needed workers in 2033.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I was responding to, is that
okay?
Is that number? I think it's helpful information, but it seems like our job is to also project.
So, and I'm not looking at seeing the comment, looking at my slide here, but yeah, the projections are based on employment department projections under what they would call status quo conditions, and do not take into account, even legislation that we are sure is going to pass next year for the most part, right? So there's things that probably that are not incorporated into the projections, and to the extent that that's true, interested in feedback there as well.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moving to this next part of the presentation, and the team and I will follow up on the homework for you all to receive all the input.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for your feedback. I'll take it from here, and I also want to make sure that I introduce my colleagues that are here in the virtual room from Estelano Advisors, both Rahi Reddy, who's a principal with Estelano Advisors, and Rio Morales, who's serving as project manager for this effort. They're here. Rahi is going to join me for part of this presentation as well. So I just wanted to. This is the first time they come into this space, so I wanted to make sure to name them here. So anyway, moving forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching. So Andrew talked about just the occupation selection and these occupational profiles, all of which are going to inform the eventual assessment of the NCS workforce. I'm going to try to bring us in kind of narrow the funnel a little bit to the next iteration of our work, which is really the recommendations that are going to come out of this, and trying to think about the adequate framing. This is an incredibly broad sector, just thinking through all of the sectors that were named in the request for proposals that we responded to, and just hearing you all just now. Occupations span multiple sectors. Others might be specific to one or two. There might be occupations that we're missing entirely. So just as a reminder, one of the things that I really wanted to bring forward as part of our assessment at the end of this is that we would like to make recommendations that directly identify interventions that will increase the quality of existing jobs and offer pathways to advancement. So with that frame in mind, we do believe it makes sense to focus on the occupations in the maintenance and implementation sectors. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm bringing back this concept of plan, implement, maintain. Imperfect, of course, but this is sort of the frame that we wanted to test with you all here from earlier in the presentation. We did our best to sort these occupations into the right categories and test with you all how they land. Between these phases, and of course there is a lot of porousness between this, but generally speaking, there's a breadth in the types of roles, the education likely required for each, and then the sample occupations. Based on what we've heard from meetings with folks so far, the jobs in the implementation and maintenance sectors tend to be the jobs that are out in the field. These are what we're generally describing as, the jobs where you get your hands dirty, if you will. And we've also heard that in many cases, these jobs can be uncertain in terms of seasonality and jobs available. And we also know that these jobs may become increasingly more technical with increased mechanization that will demand additional training. So we know that these are critical jobs that we need to make sure, as I've stated before, in order to make sure that the project meets the natural climate solution need, that these jobs in the implementation and maintenance sector are particularly important to ensure that the training and the pay are to where they need to be. Next slide. So, like I said, ample opportunity to improve the quality of the jobs in the maintenance and implementation phases. We see this as an effort to raise the floor on these critical jobs and also help articulate pathways into higher paid, higher skilled work. So that doesn't mean that we are ignoring the planning jobs. In fact, one of our key questions to employers such as yourselves and experts are there viable pathways to train workers from the maintenance and implementation jobs to some of these higher paid and higher skilled jobs? There's examples in other sectors where specialized training can be offered through a community college or a pre-apprenticeship program to help fill a need. And these are the sorts of things that we want to be testing with folks in the course of our interviews, which are happening now. So next slide. I keep referencing this idea of a quality job throughout this presentation, and I'd be remiss to not share what I mean. What you see here up on the slide is from Jobs to the Future. This is a national nonprofit think tank. This is a framework, a quality jobs framework that they've published and have written extensively about This is a framework about how employers, industry leaders, policymakers can think about job quality. And when we talk about job quality, we're really talking about more than just pay and benefits. We want to talk about things like flexibility, stability, and advancement opportunities that are essential for workers to sustain themselves and their families. Because after all, this is a workforce study, but I think we also see it as a bit of an economic development study. How could we invest in some of these workers to help stabilize communities and their families, particularly in the more rural parts of the state? So we can share a document that describes this in greater detail post-meeting, but I want to touch upon one category here, just in the interest of time. You all can see the category of advancement, second category from the left. The ability to advance in a job is crucial to a quality job, obviously. And then the first item there around skills-based practices reference a practice where hiring and promotion are based on skills and competencies rather than traditional credentials like a degree. And that's actually a really interesting concept that we've seen in other sectors where, you know, why do we have certain degree requirements for certain positions? If appropriate, we may want to prioritize other things like skills gathered, time on the job, et cetera, in order to make the argument for promotion or advancement. Again, that might not be for every single job, but certainly something that we want to revisit or review as we talk to folks out in the field. So that's an example there. And then I also want to take a moment to talk about transparent career pathways. And at this time, Rahi, I'll turn it to you to talk a little bit about this concept here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I wanted to first just, I know Jonathan's on from Metro, so giving a big shout out to this image, this graphic here. We actually, when I served at Metro as the equity director, we pulled together a construction career pathways project that pulled together 19 governments to come together and figure out together how to diversify our construction sector on our large scale projects. And one of the most important things we wanted to center on is what is the experience of the worker? What is the experience of the worker in that field? And what is the journey map for that worker in terms of everything from the minute that they, kind of are aware of a position to the skills and trainings that they need and the work that they have to do through the process of, hopefully getting to some form of certification and accomplishment in their training, deployment on the job, and then what are those kind of career opportunities post those certification. And this actually graphic was made by Sabrina at Metro from our team, and really I think is just an example for you all to see that when we talk about a transparent career pathway, it's really about trying to help us understand for the various jobs that we're going to be focusing on, how do people actually get into them? What do they need to know to even, qualify? What do they need to build as competencies on the job? What does accomplishment look like? How do they know? Are there certifications or other kinds of specializations that can further enhance their marketability in the job market? And over time, do these jobs really provide kind of that, family sustaining, career developing opportunities? And so we're hoping to create these kinds of transparent and clear career pathways for some of these key jobs, thinking about the ones that that don't always come up on your radar. You go to college, you get a degree in biology, you're deployed, work for the state, or you work for a local government or an organization, and you're supposed to kind of be on a path. For a lot of these jobs, we may be actually defining and mapping this for the first time, because this is really one of the few first times that we're looking at these sectors. And I think it will create a lot of transparency for us as we're trying to think about what are those places where workers face significant barriers and structural barriers to advancing their career. where are the places where we see more disparities among different types of workers in the field that really start to show up in terms of where people advance and who doesn't. And it also offers us as a collective here to think about what are those most important strategic interventions at what time and at what phase of a worker's journey that will, if we did some strategic interventions, with investments, with training, with partnerships with colleges, et cetera, that we could see more success rates for workers in these fields. And I think the other key piece that, Cynthia talked about was, what is job quality in those jobs right now? And what are strategic interventions to improve job quality for these positions, that especially those that we see there will be a high demand and a need for workers. And so we're hoping for more transparency and more clarity. And I think the discussion we had with Andrew earlier is going to be an example of that. So when we talk about these broad categories of jobs, we want to make sure that you understand, that the broader public understands, our electeds understand, what do we mean by these jobs? Can we name the classifications? Can we describe how we select people for those jobs? What are the requirements we have traditionally, put as, even barriers to entry that could be removed because they don't serve a purpose? So those are the kinds of things we want to have full transparency with you and get your input so we can make these maps, and then we can really clarify where those strategic interventions can be to improve these jobs. Hand it back to you, Cynthia.
Yes, thanks, Rahi. And now I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but wanted to open it up to questions. We've got some questions here up on the screen that we'd love to hear answers to. I know folks may have questions or reactions to what we've presented so far. I'm happy to take any and all questions and discussion. And sorry, Liz, I spoke over you.
No, I was just saying that is okay. I think we can go until about 11:05. And if you have follow-ups to the plan, implement, maintain frame, now is the time. So. When we're thinking about implementing NCS, so last time we talked together about a lot of things. We talked about all of the jobs that are involved and attached to what it takes to get natural climate solutions to the ground. And in subsequent conversations with the project team, focusing on that project manager and down hierarchy is kind of where we settled in order to really focus on who's doing the work. And also to be responsive to the statute of trying to figure out workforce development programs and training programs related to accelerating natural climate solutions on the ground across Oregon. So I feel like I've heard that there's a lot of noodling that needs to happen with the categories and the occupations. So like this belongs on all three. This is two. This is. Is there any heartache about this frame, Lauren?
Yeah, thanks. This is kind of a rough thought. I'm trying to absorb a lot of this. I guess I have two questions. One is more just around this entire framework of like quality of jobs and like people wanting to take certain jobs that may be lower paying. I mean, that to me is a broader conversation around like housing affordability, location of job, like all of that, which, the study doesn't necessarily have to dig into, but I think definitely needs to like highlight that there's other pieces there. And then my second question is more on like this broad framework of occupation, like forester, farmer. And I'm curious if what we're looking at is gonna get us to what we're wanting to know? Because to me, it would be, I mean, it's one thing to encourage folks to have training programs and workforce for farming and forestry, but a lot of those jobs aren't necessarily doing the natural climate solutions. I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect there, at least for me. So just wanted to flag those two.
Thank you. Those are good inputs. Cynthia.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit to the first one. Yes, we are certainly not going to be directly making recommendations around things like housing affordability, though I acknowledge that that often is a major driver in terms of where folks decide to, on jobs select, where they decide to work and whatnot. There is an item in the quality jobs framework around some of these kind of wraparound support. So I think to the extent that it comes up in our interviews, I think it is certainly something that we could name. I'm thinking about not just housing, but a variety of other outside factors, be it childcare, lack of childcare, transportation. I know sometimes for folks entering training programs, if they are or aren't paid, or sometimes folks are just in need on some like flexible stipends in order for folks to be able to enter a time limited training program. So all of those things I think are acknowledged as part of the quality jobs framework, and something that we are certainly conscious of going into some of these interviews. We do see the audience of this report as certainly not just Odo, but I'm also thinking of other state agencies. Yes, those that touch natural climate solutions, but maybe those that go beyond. So to the extent that there's any recommendations that we can make around some of those wraparound supports, housing being one of them, but also transportation, childcare, et cetera, that could affect the ability of folks to enter and advance through the NCS sector, we will certainly call it out. Yeah, and then the second one I think is kind of more around occupations, and I don't know, Andrew, if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I can jump in quickly there. A couple of things. One, I think, excellent question, point on specificity. And I think that's one example or one reason why you did not see administrative assistants, for example, on our occupational lists. Many offices cannot run without an administrative assistant, but it's such a general occupation. It's not general, I would suggest not specific to NCS. And so certainly probably does not deserve a profile unless we're hearing feedback for whatever reason that was a big need in the sector. We do have some numbers. We didn't show them to you, and the report will include some estimates that get a little beyond the total occupational numbers. So it's not all farmers, not all foresters, but a subset of those, so that we're trying to count something that's more, a better description of the NCS sector. Still won't be perfect, but we do plan to do that. And third point, I think that's the specificity question is a reason why we're looking for input on particularly those skills and so on in the profile. What are the NCS skills and trainings that are important that maybe differentiate an NCS forester or farmer from a more general farmer or forester?
And can I just add that I think that when we're looking at these jobs are the jobs, and then it's where they're applied that is also like the pivot. And so I think for us, we're trying to also be true to the fact that this X job that does X skill requires this X training or, kind of basic minimums, and, provides, X wages. And for us, we want to make sure we're clear about that. And then, of course, where those jobs are applied to, kind of the fields that we're talking about. And at the end of the day, there's we've seen this in green jobs and other sectors as well. A lot of times these jobs are the jobs, and then they're like applied in different arenas. So we want to make sure that people understand that we'd love to see more and more of these jobs like pivot toward the goals that we have and we want. And there's still the same barriers, the same challenges to bringing more folks into, on the climate side of this.
Thank you. I would add, Lauren, I kind of had the same reaction, because it's like this this existing workforce database that has titles that employers have to, report on. And then the NCS World has a lot of very specific titled occupations. And so we've been sending the project team the names of occupations, that do the work, have sent the staff web pages for land trusts and the soil and water conservation districts, and just to even do a comparison of like, okay, if this is what this is called in real life, like how might this fit into that database? And so if you were open to doing that and giving additional thoughts about what occupations are called in this space, be really helpful, I think, to the team. It's part of their interview questions as they launch on interviews. So more to come there for sure. Any closing question or, oh yes, I see hands, David.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to flag that, in my mind, I'm just trying to think through how the capacity for these jobs might be inherently different in our more urban parts of the state versus our really geographically remote areas. And how do we ensure that as we go forward that we can also help promote a good distribution of NCS opportunities in our super rural communities where we already really struggle with capacity for some of this work? I don't have an answer to that, but I just wanted to flag it as I'm looking at some of those job opportunities on the list. There seems to be you could point out which jobs are very, very rare in rural areas and which jobs are quite common I feel like kind of easily. And so I could see there's a natural sort of opportunity difference.
Well, I'll just say that we are very excited. We are scheduling lots of interviews with workforce partners out in various parts of the state, including in rural areas, overemphasis to that very point, because we want the texture of the realities on the ground, and we want all the nuances of that, including to the point that you're making. There's a reason certain jobs are certain places, and there's infrastructure reasons for those as well, of like investments or underinvestments, training programs and opportunities, among others. So we're excited to dig deep, and we've got a bunch scheduled over the next couple of weeks. So more to come there. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great comments in the chat that are being recorded. Nikita, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick note that that there was, and also say thank you for just the highlighting of certain individuals that have a little bit more barriers to go ahead and be able to enter into some of these employment opportunities. Just also wanting to acknowledge just that the small farmers that have limited resources, including access to basic resources to implement natural climate solutions in their farming practices, should also be mentioned and should also be taken into consideration while taking in the study, which I again appreciate the fact that you guys are taking this into consideration. Just because I'm, as noticed in the representation of the individuals that are already being considered in a part of this study, they're already a primary selection of individuals that have access to these kinds of conversations and participation, and there's just a lot of people left out. I particularly work and do a lot of work primarily in Polk County due to land acquisition in agriculture and trying to remove barriers for individuals to be able to access some of these spaces. So I just, again, really wanted to emphasize and thank you for taking the time to consider those individuals, and also just note that those individuals really are trying their best to get to the basics to be able to implement the climate solutions that they are wanting to participate in.
Thank you.
Yes, appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, it's time to move on. And thank you, project team. There's so much work that goes into this. So the discussion the slides are like 5 to 7 slides, but there's so much work, and really appreciate you guys putting your minds on it and all the prep work that you did for this. As I said, team, we will work together with the project team and send out homework and feedback sheets that, as you know, will be very helpful to them as we've discussed today. So thank you. And looking to our next project team as we transition. Ta-da, there we go. Okay. Katie and Olga.
Yes, I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Excellent. Great. I was
I'm
like
just
looking
waiting
around.
for
I'm like,
your cue.
where's the list of people? Where's everyone? Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, please introduce yourselves and take it away, since this group has not met you before.
Yeah, absolutely. And hello, it's nice to meet everyone. My name is Katie Goldman. I'm a senior fellow at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. And I have an expertise in greenhouse gas inventories and accounting in the land-based sector. And I'm really happy to be here and helping Oregon prepare this inventory. There are a number of other members of the team here, and they will, some of them will be presenting as well behind me, but I don't think we want to spend too much time introducing them one by one. So I may just go ahead and get started if you think that's good,
That
Liz.
sounds great. Yes.
Fabulous. All right, well, so I'm really excited to tell you about this work we've started with you all, developing a land-based greenhouse gas inventory for Oregon. The natural and working lands of Oregon include basically all lands in the state. So the term land-based greenhouse gas inventory is meant to cover your needs as you pursue opportunities in natural and working lands. So I'm ready for the next slide. So today we have a few things we want to cover. First of all, I'm going to spend a little time just getting everybody kind of on the same page with the purpose of conducting an inventory, because we want to dive a little deeper and ask you for some help. And so I think it will help if we all kind of understand the bigger picture. We're going to share an overview on some of our progress on specific aspects of the inventory, and engage your help, hopefully, in identifying resources so we can make this the best possible inventory with the information available to us. And it's also hopefully a time for you to get your questions answered and clarify for you what it is we're trying to do with this project. So with that, let's move on. I wanted just kind of give you a sense of where we are in the project. This is a pretty accelerated timeline. You probably saw this if you were able to watch the July Commission recording. We're trying to really do a lot in a short amount of time for preparing the first ever inventory. So, but it's going great. We've made rapid progress in the last few months. We are still at the left end of this diagram, where we're deep involved in stakeholder consultations, and that will be wrapping up pretty soon here. But this is where we are, and we've managed to meet with 7 agencies to gather information, discuss data resources. We've started compiling the data, considering the calculation methods, and we have more consultations ahead that we've got planned, and today is even considered one of those consultations, but we are well on our way. So what we have here is an example of a greenhouse gas inventory, and this is to kind of bring everybody up to speed and give you a quick explanation of what we are trying to do. So these are hypothetical data. This is a hypothetical picture on the left side here with that bar chart of a greenhouse gas inventory. And what it's showing is a long-term trend over time, looking backwards from today. This doesn't go all the way back to 1990 because I just didn't want to, there wasn't enough room on the slide, but our inventory will go back to 1990 if we can. Anyway, it's looking backward from today, and each color represents a separate category in the inventory. In this case, because it's a land-based inventory, at the highest level, those categories will be land types, and I'll just give you a quick definition of those on the next slide. And you can see here in this diagram that emissions can be positive or negative. And negative emissions are called removals. So sometimes we'll say emissions and removals because we want to be clear that we're trying to capture both. And I think the key take home for you all is that the capacity for removals is pretty unique to the land sector. And a land-based inventory is essential for demonstrating this importance, basically showing where you are today, and it sort of indicates the potential for the future. So inventories, I've already said they establish a long-term trend. They're a basis for making future predictions, and I'm going to hit on that in a minute. They also help for tracking progress. So if you make policy changes today that you think will affect your emissions trajectory, you hope to see that in updates to your future inventory. And it informs policymaking, and it is a really good tool for demonstrating the importance and the opportunity in the land-based sector to achieve long-term strategic reductions in your emissions. And I'm ready for the next slide. These are the highest level categories that are depicted in a land-based inventory and will be depicted in the Oregon inventory. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I do, and there was a list and definitions in the presentation you already watched. Some of these we're going to talk about today. So we're going to, and I'll tell you in a minute what those are. So let's go ahead and move on. But these are the high level categories that we're going to be investigating. So I promised I'd explain the relationship between an inventory and the future, and what role the inventory plays in your ability to make predictions and develop policies in the future. So this is a graph that shows the sum total of those different bars in the previous slide. So the blue line on this graph is a summation of emissions and removals from the hypothetical inventory. And it shows net emissions and removals over time up until today. And the inventory basically stops there. But what the inventory does for other analyses is it provides a really important basis for predicting future trends, looking at past trends. So you can do this for multiple scenarios by adjusting some of the assumptions you make, and basically project alternate scenarios. And as policymakers, a policymaker then would come up with the list of strategies that's going to get you on the pathway that you are you desire most on your goal pathway. So the work we're doing for you is essentially the blue line in this graph. It doesn't stop there. We're going to develop this inventory for you, but also provide a manual, and currently even now working with Liz and Jason and others in the state, developing capacity to continue to carry out this inventory over time without us. That's our goal. Our goal is for the state of Oregon to be able to continue that blue line into the future as the future arrives, if you will. Okay, so the next slide, we want to just give you a sense of how the numbers are calculated, because we are going to get into some deeper discussion about the methodology, but it really can boil down to this sort of conceptual model of how we're working. You need two kinds of data and a methodology to calculate emissions. And typically in a land-based sector, the activity data, which is data representing management or actions, it's often acres. So the number of forested land of a certain forest type under a certain management type, for example. There are factors that go along with the activity data, emission factors. They basically translate the activity data into emissions. Sometimes they're as simple as one factor that can translate and acreage into tons of methane per acre. And in the end, you get an estimate of emissions and removals. In reality, there's more complexity to this, and there are different levels. And the IPCC guidelines do a really nice job. That's the international standard for inventories. They do a really nice job of explaining different levels. There's a tier 1, which is basically this model, a tier 3, which can be a really complex biogeochemical model with ground-based measurements. I would say rare that we use those in inventories. Usually it's somewhere in between, utilizing both methods to get the best estimate, and that's called tier 2. So we can move on to the next slide. And this is another sort of summation based on that conceptual model of the data we'll need to compile the land-based inventory for Oregon. And as I said, we're well on our way to gathering these data. This graphic here shows the different types of activity data, and I don't want to read it. I think it'd be really more interesting to get into the discussions that our sector leads are going to have next for you. But this is what they're talking about. They're talking about activity data, emissions parameters, modeling and tools, and also expert advisors to help inform this process. So I want to show you the next slide, which is just to remind you that we have spoken to 7 agencies. We have plans for more outreach, but these are the kinds of data that we are gathering, that we're learning about: fertilizer rates, forest carbon parameters, different kinds of maps and data available on habitat and land use and land area. It's been really productive. There are some challenges with identifying data that we have to keep in mind. So we're also trying to kind of weed out what's useful and not useful. It's all relevant and important, but what we can use depends on things like completeness, how often it's updated, if it's qualitative or quantitative, so on and so forth. And just to move to the next slide here, and I'm racing through this because I think the good stuff is going to come next when our sector leads talk to you. But as I mentioned, we're not just leaving Oregon with an inventory report that they need us or other consultants to develop. We're leaving them with a technical manual, which is the plan and the process for the state to continue generating this inventory over time, so you can maintain that time series and use the inventory to its fullest potential. And then finally, just to queue up the next part of the discussion, and I had 10 minutes and I went a few minutes over, but I think we're good still. I'm going to hand this over to sector leads. We have really highly qualified experts with deep knowledge of the land-based sectors and quantifying emissions, and they're leading the development of the estimates for each sector. And so today we're going to get an overview of wetlands in the state of Oregon and that approach from Eric Ward and Lena, whose last name I can't remember. I'm very sorry, Lena. And then we're going to talk about a couple categories related to the forest land sector, but the forest land sector is very broad. There are many categories within forest land. We're going to talk about 2 of them: forest emissions and wood products. And with that, I don't know if you want me to pause and take some questions here, Ruth. I haven't been able to see what's going on in the chat, but if there are clarifying points, it's probably worth making them now.
Agree. Is there anything you did not understand from what Katie presented?
Sorry, it was so fast, but I'm happy to explain things.
We've talked about inventories. We've talked about distinction between sectors. So we may be good. Okay.
Okay. Great. Okay. Then let's pass it over to our next speaker on wetlands. Eric, I think that's you.
Next slide.
Are you there?
Is that what's happening? Yeah.
Or is it Lena?
Oh no, Eric. Are you frozen, Eric? Oh no, you're not.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Oh, I heard you for a hot second and I do not hear you.
Yeah, Eric, your audio is not working.
Not working yet. Keep talking. Nope. Sometimes if you hit the button to the left of the red X, the ellipses, at the top of that panel is switch audio. Could that maybe work for you? No.
Lena, do you feel able to get us started?
I can probably get us started. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So both Eric and I are working on the wetlands portion of this inventory. Eric is specifically working on the non-tidal wetlands, and I am working on the tidal wetlands. And we'll get into a little bit about what that means. But essentially, the way that we've organized this chunk on wetlands is by talking to you about the status of our data, like where we've gotten data to start doing this inventory, and then some of the proposed methodology. And then we'll go into like the actual methods a bit more. And so we've engaged with a bunch of different agencies within the state, ODFW, OWEB, DLCD. We've identified technical experts in the field, such as Jane Rombutz, Tony DeAndrea, and Sarah Hamilton. We also are using data from non-government resources, including the Pacific Northwest Blue Carbon Working Group, as well as citing and using literature and data from academia. We also plan to use state-level maps of habitat extent, especially with seagrass, kelp, and inland wetland extent using the state wetlands inventory. At the federal level, most of the data that we're using to do this inventory comes from the federal level. So our main working horse for the inventory across all land sectors is this NLCD data. For wetlands specifically, or non-tidal wetlands specifically, we're really looking at the National Wetlands Inventory and trying to think about how that compares to the state level wetlands inventory. For coastal wetlands, we're looking at CCAP, which I'll get into, for tidal wetlands, we're going to be using CCAP, which I'll talk about when we get to it, and then regional scale mapping efforts through PMEM. And so like Katie was telling us before, this conceptual model that we're using is trying to determine changes in land cover through activity data, and then applying emissions factors. So changes in biomass or soil carbon and other greenhouse gases over time, and what that means for emissions and removals. And a lot of the methodology that we're using, which every sector will have their own methodology, but for what we're doing, it's primarily in ArcGIS and some coding languages. And so that can really be taken on by folks in the state to hopefully do this themselves. Okay, next slide, please. Is Eric's microphone working?
Eric, we had heard you for a minute when you did not have your earbuds in. You were highlighted blue when we were working on that. So something worked for a little while, just so you know. But we can't hear you now. There you go.
Yep.
You're there.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I had to call on my phone. I don't know what's going on. Sorry about that. And okay, so as many of you know, there are a wide variety of wetlands in Oregon. At a national scale, the EPA National Wetland Condition Assessment, which is conducted approximately every 5 years, breaks the continental U.S. into 10 ecoregions. 3 of these are present in Oregon. Of course, we have the coastal wetlands in the Pacific Coast ecoregion. And since there is such a steep climatic gradient from east to west, primarily in Oregon, there are two major ecoregions, the Western Mountains and the Zurich West ecoregions. Inland regions are further separated into woody and herbaceous wetlands for reporting in the EPA National Wetland Condition Assessment. So this is kind of the national approach that's been made towards data on ecosystem carbon in wetlands, based primarily on the amount of data available. Of course, there's just like in Oregon, the rest of the country, a wide variety of wetlands, but specific ecosystem carbon numbers for each one can't necessarily be defined. We can look at the next slide, though, to look at some of that variability. So the Oregon Explorer, which is a collaboration between OSU and the Institute for Natural Resources, which you're all familiar with, I'm sure, breaks wetland habitats into, I think, 18 different, how you count it, 18 different ecosystem types. Some of these are priorities for restoration, and what we're currently involved in is engaging with state-level departments on determining which of these we'd want to pull out and try to get specific numbers for if possible. And but it is unlikely we will find carbon numbers for every single one of these in the first inventory. Of course, this can always be an area for future improvement, but we will have to do some lumping and combining of these wetland types. The most clear path forward for all land cover types, and we can look at the next slide, is using the National Land Cover Database. The National Land Cover Database has different land cover types relevant to wetlands, primarily woody and herbaceous wetland layers, which corresponds to the EPA carbon numbers. And of course, open water often either is restored into wetland or wetlands are lost into open water. So often it becomes a relevant cover type. Now, on top of this, we can layer other information, such as those ecoregions I talked about, as well as, for example, salinity data or tidal high water marks to distinguish coastal wetlands from inland wetlands. And I believe Lena can talk about that starting on the next slide.
Yeah, so for coastal wetlands, as Eric just mentioned, the NLCD database doesn't distinguish between tidal versus non-tidal wetlands. And so in order to capture emissions and removals of, all of Oregon's tidal wetlands, we really need to use a different data set to understand those changes. And so the data set that we're using, or the data source that we're going to use, next slide, please, is NOAA's Coastal Change Analysis layer, or CCAP layer. And this produces coastal land cover layers for the entire US, and this is what is used in the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory as well. And so the data layers that we're really interested in for the coasts are basically palustrine or estuarine land types or wetland types. So if you go to the next slide. In Oregon, what this really looks like, so this is an image on the left of Siletz Bay. And so that's just raw imagery. And what CCAP allows us to do is look at the actual area or acreage of each of these different types of wetlands, so palustrine and estuarine environments, as well as submerged aquatic beds. And what is really awesome about CCAP is that it has a time series. And so we're able to look at changes in these tidal wetlands from as early as 1996 all the way through till 2021. Give or take a couple of years there where we will be doing some extrapolating. Yeah, I think we're done after this. Next slide. Yeah, but the idea here is that we're using both federal, state and non-government sources to better refine this, I guess, larger scale data set from CCAP in order to make sure that we're applying the correct emissions factors for the diverse wetlands. And in Oregon specifically, there's been a ton of work. And so different from non-tidal wetlands, with tidal wetlands, we are able to apply more specific emissions factors, which makes the greenhouse gas inventory really robust. I think that's now everything. And we have some questions too.
Thank you. Do you want to go ahead and ask those questions?
Yeah, I would love to.
Okay.
Yeah, so one, we're happy to take questions. I see there's some conversation going in the chat.
Great.
But in general, we have 4 questions, and we're really looking for data sets with biomass and carbon stocks, or biomass and carbon stocks, soil carbon burial rates, and biomass growth curves for non-tidal wetlands. For tidal wetlands, we feel like we do have a good idea of where these are, but it's always great to hear confirmation of these data sources. In addition, we are looking for information on management or restoration activities across wetlands, such as restrictions to tidal flow. We've identified a couple of these resources, but again, knowing more can be better. We have questions about land ownership across the states as well, and whether or not anyone on this call, or if you know of people who are carbon experts with regional experience in wetlands. You know, we're coming in here not with the same background as those folks, so we'd really like to hear from y'all. Great.
This team is aware of the Blue Carbon Working Group, just to put that out there.
And also, I think it did get mentioned at the beginning, but we are not relying solely on national land cover data sets for where wetlands are. The state does have a data set where they've combined local wetland inventories with the national wetland inventory.
Jasmine, and please introduce kind of your interest in who you are for the team.
Yep. Hi, my name is Jasmine. I work for the Pew Charitable Trust on helping states incorporate blue carbon coastal wetlands mainly into climate planning processes like this one. And we're also, just to quickly flag, we're working in Washington State right now alongside Silvestrum to actually help the state develop their coastal wetlands inventory, greenhouse gas inventory. And I think Eric beat me to the punch here. It sounds like, I was going to ask, it sounds like we'll be using the CCAP for land cover change data. I was curious about CMEX, but it sounds like, Eric, you will be using CMEX since that's more regional, right? For classification of wetlands for the state of Oregon.
Yeah, Lena's actually been doing some more specific analysis on that, so I'll let her speak to that.
Okay, the reason I ask is just this is an issue that's been bubbling up with the inventory in Washington State as well, and I think when the first draft inventory for blue carbon was done here in the state of Oregon, this came up as well. That forested tidal wetlands specifically, which kind of straddle that line between like the forest lands and wetlands, are captured better under the CMEX data set. And in terms of answering that question, what carbon expert you should contact, perhaps Laura Brophy would be a good contact for this. She was the one that actually helped develop the CMEX, which stands for Coastal and Marine Ecological Classification Standard. And that is very well ground truthed here in Oregon specifically. But just to put that out there, we can, of course, discuss more offline.
Yeah, just to respond to that. So we are in conversation with Laura, obviously, for Washington, and I am also doing that analysis. And so the crossover is really good in terms of the harmonization steps that we need to take. We are moving ahead with using the PMEL estuary extent layer, which if you're familiar with that, should include that forested wetland upstream. And I think that's what CCAP doesn't necessarily do a good job of classifying by itself. But if we are pulling in data from that extent, we'll be able to see whether or not that's classified as forested or as palustrine forested. And I believe it looks like it's classified as palustrine forested, in which case we're going to be including it in the inventory. Obviously, we need to have more conversations with Laura about this, and I assume in the next week in that Washington meeting, we'll talk about this a little bit more.
Yeah, we'll definitely have some follow-up discussions. Thanks, Lena, for answering those questions. Just one more to add. In terms of seagrass or eelgrass, are you all fully including that to the extent possible, given existing data sets? Or is this something that's just going to be mentioned at this point in time in the inventory, and then once data improves or more data sets are available, then it will be fully included?
Yeah, so we've actually been in conversation with Oregon State, and we are getting the state level seagrass data. So the PMEP layer, which is the regional layer, only covers seagrass until 2016, and the state has more surveys post then. So we are trying to include that. And as far as kelp, it's the same conversation. Like, we're getting that data from the state, and we're going to hope to say something. We'll see. It's a little bit difficult with the time series, just because that data isn't available for every single year, but certainly we'll be able to see change in area over some years and apply emissions factors for seagrass. Whereas with kelp, there's a lot of conversation about kelp blue carbon in general. And so I think that might be a section or something and not necessarily be included in the inventory itself.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very helpful.
Those questions, Jazz. There are good comments happening in the chat, and Jason, thank you for fielding those, and team, feel free to do that as well. Before we move on, I did want to raise the question I think Jonathan Saul brought up in the chat about kind of like this. There are some very detailed vegetation layers out there, and that I know the team has talked about the kind of like, you want to use detailed enough but not too detailed, and also you have to wait until you have carbon data. So could someone speak to that for this group? I think, Eric, you said it most succinctly. Your vegetation data depends on the carbon data that you have, like what you might want to use. So
essentially, if we create a new classification of vegetation, we need to have not just one, but multiple studies to support assigning numbers of carbon on an annual basis, right? So annual uptake of carbon, be that into biomass or soil carbon, versus emissions, such as methane and other non-CO2 greenhouse gases. So what tends to limit us is not knowing what types of vegetation are there, but what are the relevant carbon numbers for that vegetation type. For example, we did look at the land fire classifications, which are much more rich in vegetation types, but we don't have a strong set of carbon numbers for each of those vegetation types. That said, we are engaged in looking at priority habitats and seeing if we can do anything for that, or at least set the state on a path of this is how you would go about doing that once you have those carbon numbers.
thank you for that. I think helpful information for folks to have. And of course, as we maintain the inventory over time at the state, when you run the inventory, oftentimes you also aim to improve it because there's new data, there's new information, there's new considerations. And so the team is busy considering what's a good start for this first generation inventory and what they're going to recommend to us that we keep looking at over time, so we can refine the inventory. Okay, I have to move us along to the next LEN category. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Sound check really quick. You can
Yes.
hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Yes, hi, everybody. And I do want to emphasize the point about kind of continuous improvement of the inventory. Right after I introduce myself. I'm Olga Leandris. I work at GHDMI. I'm a senior project manager there, and I'm kind of the overall project management lead on this project, and kind of the technical lead on a couple of the categories. As Katie mentioned, the forest land category includes several important subcategories, and I'm only going to touch on 2 of them today, and we'll get to the rest during the next meeting or send you information about it in the future. But I'm going to talk about the emissions related to fire on forested land as well as other natural lands, and then harvested wood products. Hopefully we'll have time. And just to kind of circle back to the continuous improvement, the inventory cycle, it truly is a cycle. Every time you begin compiling the inventory for the next cycle, you start by looking at the recommendations and, all the priority improvements that were identified in the previous cycle, and looking to implement some of those recommendations to improve either data collection or derivation of new emission parameters that improve accuracy and completeness of the inventory. Okay, so switching to the discussion about fire emissions, what this really takes into consideration is emissions that occur due to wildfires as well as prescribed burns on land in Oregon. And I wanted to emphasize that this particular category will be looking at emissions of non-CO2 gases from the combustion that arises during that fire. Those fires, carbon loss that occurs during the fires is actually accounted under the forest land component of the inventory. So I'm not gonna talk about that right now. But as Lena and Eric had mentioned, we had started these conversations with state agencies about availability of state data. We've spoken with Department of Forestry and Department of Fish and Wildlife to kind of understand what data sets they're collecting and managing on fires. I know that there are technical experts in this area. I haven't had a chance yet to really pin down who will be the kind of the team that we collaborate with closely on this. This is, in Oregon and on the West Coast, of course, in particular, wildfires are, very closely tracked and managed by federal agencies, by state agencies. So the non-governmental resources don't often kind of make a big role in this. However, the university resources and the tools that are developed that we will be using actually do play a role. I should probably have mentioned that in this line. We are identifying state-specific data sources. We've been told that there are data sets on prescribed fire, but we still, I think, have yet to kind of see what they look like and really get into the details on that. And of course, there are numerous federal data sources available. The Monitoring Trends in Burn Severity, the National Interagency Fire Center keeps track of fires, BLM. And then there's satellite data that is fed into these models that is collected at the national level as well from MODIS to help model emissions from fires. So specifically, the activity data that we need in order to estimate emissions are the burn perimeters. So where is the fire occurring? How large is the extent of the fire and where it is? What is on the land where that fire occurs? So this is the fuel type, like what is the emissions will depend on what is being burned. And the moisture conditions will drive kind of the intensity of the fire and emissions related to that. That data is available to us. Then the emission factors are also kind of the rate of releases of the different constituents that we're interested in. This is provided through the modeling tools that we're going to use. And the methodology that we propose to use is the Consume model that has a tool that has been developed by Michigan Technical University, which is called the Wildland Fire Emission Inventory System. This is a tool that is used by the National Inventory as well to do these estimates. And I'll give you a kind of a peek at what that looks like in on the next slide. Not on the slide after, right? This one. So as I said, the methodology is based on the Consume model from the U.S. Forest Service, and it's implemented in this calculator tool, which makes it really easy to use the input data that they have kind of already integrated into the calculator. But it also allows users to feed in data that they have. And so whatever they have can be also supplemented by state data. And it has the burn parameters, the fuel type that comes from other kind of established data sources like land fire, fuel moisture, and emission factors all already embedded in the tool. They're backed by, literature, extensive literature, and studies and systems that kind of have been tested and run for this tool for a number of years. And then the output of the model is kind of multi-pronged. It gives us estimates of all the pollutant emissions. So it's not just greenhouse gases, but other kind of air pollutants. It also estimates heat release and fuel consumption. And again, just wanted to emphasize that the CO2 emissions associated with loss of biomass will be reported under forest carbon stock changes. And here we will only be looking at methane and nitrous oxide emissions that are due to the combustion that occurs during the fires. Next slide, please.
Olga, can I just interject real quick? Because there was a question in the chat that I thought would be good to address real quick.
Thank you. Yes.
And it is regarding emissions from agricultural field burning. And so can you just speak to that? I mean, I know we're talking about forest land here, but
yes,
can you speak how that'll be done?
Yes,
briefly.
Yes. So you're probably aware that Oregon also has a parallel inventory effort, the sector-based greenhouse gas inventory, which accounts for emissions from kind of other sectors. They don't include land-based emissions, but agriculture sector sort of gets funny treatment, special treatment, let's say, because some emissions that occur in agriculture are included in the sector-based inventory, and some of the emissions related to land management of croplands will be included in the land-based inventory. And so that inventory already accounts for residue burning emissions from agricultural lands. And we, depending on kind of capacity and availability of resources, we might see if we could find propose an alternative way to estimate it, and then give that as an option to the sector-based inventory colleagues to see if they might consider adopting a different method. But those emissions are already reported elsewhere, so we don't want to count them again here. All right, so just a quick example of what this tool looks like. And these are just screenshots from, it's a web-based tool. As you can see on the left panel, you start with kind of selecting what burns, what fires you're going to be modeling. And so where you see the arrow on the left side of the screen, it shows as an example is the MTBS parameters selected here. And then you select the year for which this occurred and the location. And so when you select Oregon, the map shows up that shows which fires are included. One limitation with using just MTBS perimeters is it includes only large fires over 1,000 acres. So we want to definitely look at the state data and other data sources and kind of ensure that we have as complete of a set of fire perimeters as possible. And then on the right side of the screen, you see the panel with the outputs. So you get the whole list of all the parameters that the model estimates, and the arrow on the right points to the row with methane. So again, the fires that are shown on the map on the left, the resulting methane emissions from that, is that number. And so this is done then for the entire time series going back to 1990 to the current year. Next slide, please. Yeah, some of the questions that I had for this group that I would appreciate input and comments on include, like, we've seen multiple groups providing us with fire data, which is great. It would be, and the task before me is kind of harmonizing and making sure that we have a complete set. So we'd love to get an input regarding, like, is there a definitive data set on wildfires within the state that is consistently updated so that we can kind of make that the primary one and as an input for future inventories. I mentioned kind of prescribed burning data is still we're on the hunt for, and kind of trying to identify who might be the holder and the manager of if there is a comprehensive data set on that. And kind of circling back to agricultural lands, or, fires on forest versus grassland or rangeland. Like, the model I'm proposing to use calculates overall emissions, but could potentially enable us to segregate by land types if that is of interest. It requires additional kind of data processing, but if people really care to see what emissions come from what land, like what habitats and what types of lands, this could potentially be included in an inventory as well if there's interest in that.
Olga, I think just as far as the broader question of if the definitive data set on wildfires, I think Kathy mentioned in the chat the one that INR compiles. I think that's the most consistently updated and comprehensive one in the state.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, it's hard for me to talk and keep track of what's going on in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's the one you want for that, but I don't know what they do for prescribed burns.
Yeah, I think my next step will be to kind of talk to folks who've shared these data sets with us and just really confirm kind of the process around them.
So Olga, while people are considering these questions and maybe others you might have about the whole presentation, I just want to interject and say that we're running out of time, sadly. So I think that the best approach is to pause at this point and Harvested Wood Products discussion for perhaps the next meeting, and even maybe we can broaden the discussion to harvested wood products and other aspects of the forest land. But we really have run out of time, so I don't want you to try and squeeze it in, Olga. And I also think it'd be nice to have some time just for a broader discussion, or we can get back to the prescribed fire questions as well. But I just want to interject with that sort of change in strategy.
Thank you, Katie.
Mm-hmm.
I notice here, team, what is your timeline deadline for getting you more info data sets if available?
As soon as possible.
That's true. I think probably, Lauren, like mid-September at the latest. Although I will say, Jason and I and the team will take the data as it comes. If someone finds data in November that they're like, oh, oops, and I don't know, no one knew about it somehow, it'll go into the report, but then like as a recommendation for incorporate this into the next iteration of the inventory, because we're also, as we're talking with people, running into agencies have so much stuff going on, which is awesome. And some of the dates have been like, this will be ready in December 2025, or this is coming out in March 2026. So we're also capturing that. So if there's something in the works that folks on this call know about as well, that's forthcoming, also very helpful. But if you're thinking of something that maybe could really be included in this inventory, that the team I'd probably say like mid-September, I think. Okay. Let's see, I'm busy searching the chat for any other questions. If you had one in the chat that you'd like to air, pop off mute. Okay. Thank you team. This is a lot of detail, and I really appreciate the overview today. I feel like it set the stage as far as like what does an inventory do and what it doesn't. And thank you for discussing both of those categories of work. This team has a lot of work ahead of them as far as all the categories and the subcategories that they have to find approaches for and recommend. We realized going through this work together that the committee, we will not be in a meeting together to hear about all the approaches for all the subcategories and categories. And so I'll be working with the chair to figure out how to send you approaches maybe out of meeting time. So if there's drafts or approaches, or a page of approach that we can send you for feedback, that might also be a way we can do that. And then the project team can come and answer questions, or if you have things to report, kind of hold that discussion time in meeting time together, because it does get so detailed and there's a lot to discuss. This is also why you're here, to help us with these details. So want to make sure that we can gather together all the information. Appreciate your time today, project team. Thank you. Kathy, do you have any final words before we drop off today?
Just thank you to pile on to your thoughts. It's been a great discussion and a good start and digging into the details. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.